Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Ms. Richards, roll call.
President Schultz, let the record show that all 5 board members are present this evening.
Thank you. Please join us in a moment of silence and Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda.
Seconded.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries 5-1. 5-0, sorry. Superintendent's report, Mrs. Richards.
President Schultz, members of the board, as we start this new school year, we celebrate all the great things that are happening in Higley. Some of these happened this summer, and we wanted to share these with you. And clickers again. There it is. All right. This summer at Arizona's Thespian Leadership Camp, we had teachers work with students there. April French, who's a high school teacher, along with John Percival, who's one of our theater teachers, and also Devin Adams went to camp. It was a great leadership experience in Heber, Arizona. While there, we had Raya McCormick, Higley High School 12th grader, and Teslin Curtis, a Williamsfield High School 12th grader, named officers. So we are celebrating that this evening. And the leaders we have within the school district. Dr. Lindsay.
Good evening, President Schultz, members of the board. We also have had some wonderful back-to-school assemblies. Ms. Richards, if you could advance the slide.
I can't.
Oh. There we go. So our staff at Centennial Elementary, every year, they do this annually. They do a performance for the kids, and this year with the Mario Brothers movie, that was their theme. So they had a whole Mario theme, and the kids loved it. They ended up with the flash mob at the end, where all the staff joined on stage and did a dance routine, and the whole place was rocking. So it was super fun. And then the next slide, we have a picture from Cortina Elementary. If you could advance one more time, I'm not sure where that went. Oh, there it is. Stripes, the mascot, was there, and the teachers also performed skits for the students, and they reviewed the character matrix. So just 2 quick examples of the many assemblies that our schools hosted to welcome kids back and get everybody excited for the new year.
Whoops, wrong direction. All right, many of you attended the Higley High School celebration of the opening of the new academic building. The social studies teachers are thrilled, moved in, and bragging every day about what's going on over there. I want to shout out to Mr. Moore and his leadership and his team for leading the charge with this. It is a beautiful facility. And if you haven't been able to tour it, we will take you on a tour. Mr. Lotzenhauser.
President Schultz, members of the board. Curriculum nights are an important start of the school year, and for those of you who are still parents, I'm sure that you had the opportunity to attend the curriculum nights where our families can go through the class schedule and walk around campus with their students and meet the teachers as well. And so we just have some highlights and some pictures of our curriculum nights at Higley High. All 4 of the secondary schools held their curriculum nights, as well as our elementaries, and that's just a great picture of Mr. Fields there holding a door open. Well done, Mr. Fields. Again, Sossaman held their curriculum night as well. Lots of smiling faces as the parents and families went through the hallways to meet the teachers.
More of the same. Elementary also held curriculum night this past Thursday, and this is a picture from Centennial.
President Schultz, members of the board, we want to highlight our upcoming events. Can you guys open that up, please? Excuse us, we've got new controllers everywhere, including us. So the next board meeting is August 23rd here in this room. We also have a school visit, which they've called superintendent visits in the past, to Bridges Elementary School. We hope that you can join us for that. They're all geared up and ready to brag because they've already told us. Of course, September 4th is Labor Day and no school. And our business partners breakfast is on September 14th.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Richards. That flash mob looked really cute. All right. Request to speak. We value input from our constituents. This time on our agenda has been set aside for anyone from the audience who wishes to address the board. Those that wish to speak have filled out speaker cards, which were due prior to the start of the meeting. Members of the board may not discuss, comment, or take action on matters raised that are not specifically identified on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to ARS 38-431.0H, action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter, responding to any criticism, or scheduling the matter for further consideration and decision at a later date. Also, we ask the audience members practice proper public medium decorum, refraining from either negative or positive responses, including clapping or verbal outbursts, to ensure fairness to all points of view. Those that refuse to follow those rules will be asked to leave. Speakers, limit your remarks to 3 minutes. Thank you for your cooperation. First, I have Aubrey Thompson, and it's being read by Melanie Shehay.
Thank you. Aubrey is a mom in the district. She's a former teacher, and she recently had open heart surgery to replace a valve. So she's not here tonight, but she cares a lot about what's happening in our district. This is from Aubrey. I watched the previous board meeting where dress code changes were discussed and am concerned about the direction this may be headed after some of the comments that were made. A few board members expressed concern that certain aspects of the dress code, such as the requirement to cover the midriff, was sexualizing our children. I do not agree. Quite the opposite, in fact. Having basic standards, including covering the midriff, teaches kids who have lots of hormones and whose brains are still developing that there's a time and a place for certain types of clothing. School isn't a fashion show, a party, or a dance club. So there's no need for anyone to be showing their midriff, boy or girl. If we don't draw the line at covering your midriff and undergarment area, what's to stop a boy from wearing some sort of crop top and sagging his pants to an uncomfortable level? Or what's to stop a girl from wearing a strapless bra and a tube top? Technically, she's covering her undergarment area. By removing that baseline expectation, we are opening up the possibility that some pretty inappropriate clothing could be worn by the kids who want to push the envelope and no one could stop them. Not really the best thing for a learning environment. We, as the adults, need to set the standard that kids should be able to follow for a school setting. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I have Melanie Shehay speaking.
Sorry, I wasn't sure of the order. Thank you for allowing me to share a few brief remarks today. I'm a taxpayer supporting the district. I'm a parent of students who've graduated from HUSD schools. In addition, I have worked in education, including working in this district office. Surely board members and district staff have done research on benefits dress codes have on student achievement and safety. I will quote from just one study, which is available on the U.S. Department of Education website. Quote, reports from principals, teachers, and students indicate that the imposition of a dress code is related to higher morale, reduced disciplinary referrals, improved school safety, and a learning-focused school climate. Close quote. We all dress appropriately for the occasion. All employees of this district have a dress code. And as you look around, you're all dressed very nicely. Thank you. Most adults have a dress code for their work. UPS drivers, U.S. postal workers, medical professionals, and all support staff, pilots, attorneys, elected officials, fire and police officers, athletes, musicians, chefs, servers, hotel staff, just to name a few. Almost every workplace requires employees to comply with a dress code. When we're on the job, we aren't free to do what we want. These policies are in place that we must comply or face losing our job. Why would we pattern for students an unrealistic environment where anything goes? K through 12 schooling is the work our children are doing to help them grow and develop and learn important knowledge and skills to set them on a trajectory for successful adult living. When doing the work of learning, dress for work. Take the work of school seriously. If you allow students to dress like they're going to the beach, don't expect them to act the part of a serious student. When you play, dress for play. When you're at home or on your own time, dress as you please. But when at school or at work, dress for the occasion. Again, that a dress code on the U.S. Department of Education is related to higher morale, reduced disciplinary referrals, improved school safety, and learning-focused school climate. I trust that the board would not consider changes to the dress code without strong research of academic improvement to support the change. You are in the business of education. All policies you approve should promote learning-focused school climate. Serve students well by setting policies that help them prepare to live as successful adults. Thank you.
Next speaker, Mrs. Barbara Summers.
Hey, good evening. I didn't prepare anything fancy, but I wanted to say that I really appreciate the work that the district did on revising the dress code policy. I know that I sent a very lengthy email, and I feel that we have taken the time to make a fair, unbiased, and inclusive dress code. Nobody's asking that you take away a dress code. We're asking that you just make it fair. To further go on, our beginning of the year has been great. Our staff at Williamsfield, as always, is amazing. Our teachers, our administration, our coaches, really appreciative of all the work that they do year-round, and especially at the beginning of the year to make parents feel like we are involved and included. And I wanted to make a comment that I think that the board should consider a student advisory council. Many other districts have a student advisory council, whether it be with the superintendent or just at the district level. And that allows the students to speak on these matters and to give their voice and their opinions because, as you know, our high school students are becoming adults and they need to make decisions for themselves, and this is a great place to get them involved in government beyond student council. So I really think that the district should consider that because we are moving in such a great direction and we are doing such good things within our community. And I appreciate you all. Thank you so much.
I think this is just Ms. P. Okay.
I come to you today with 2 points that I'd like you to consider in a future meeting. The first one has to do with why we meet at 5 p.m. As you can see, not many parents, teachers, students, or members of the community can make a 5 o'clock meeting. As a teacher, I'm cutting out trying to get here. My students, well, my own children, who are one of which is in high school, is at activities until 6:30 at night. How are their voices able to be heard? How are community voices able to be heard if the meetings maintain being at 5 p.m.? Who, therefore, is our own school board truly representing when the community cannot make it to the time? How does the community get their voices heard? This leads into my second thing I'd like the board to consider. The last meeting, which was the first one I was able to make it to by sheer chance of my husband being able to take our kids to all their events, there was a lot of verbal bullying going on amongst board members. You speak a point of view and acceptance that you want your students and faculty to have, but there was no respect amongst a bunch of you and one particular member. Her point of view, you kept changing her words and making it seem like she was against faculty just because she was asking very serious questions about a particular event. Sadly, at one of the curriculum nights that I attended, not Williamsfield, but was at one of the middle schools, I saw that same level of bullying going on amongst faculty against a new faculty member. What you all do on this board and the way you treat each other, that is viewed by your fellow teachers as what's acceptable. I was appalled when walking through that one particular middle school, and the jokes and laughter I heard from other teachers. And all I could think of is, well, how did they find that their behavior was acceptable? And I kept coming back to the last board meeting where the same type of behavior was on display. So I would like you to consider the fact that the way you speak to each other in front of the public, even when there's very few here, is how your fellow teachers treat their teachers also. Thank you.
Next, Jennifer Arnold.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Arnold. I am a teacher at Higley Traditional Academy, proud member of the Higley Education Association. Tonight, though, I'm here to talk as a mom. My daughter, Kate, graduated from Williamsfield High School in May. She began her academic career here in Higley. The first year that Centennial opened, she began at the Kinder Prep program that at that point was just one class, which obviously has grown a lot. She stayed at Centennial, moved to HTA when I was hired there, went to Cooley Middle School, and on to Williamsfield High School. At the age of 12, Kate was diagnosed with autism. So as you can imagine, the path that we were on took a right turn, and we had to navigate new waters. Sorry, public speaking, not my favorite thing. So I just wanted to give a shout out to some of the teachers at Williamsfield High School that made her academic career enjoyable. I first wanted to recognize her case manager, Nikki Fife. Nikki forged a bond with Kate and a relationship with her, and Kate came to trust her and knew that if she needed anything, that Nikki would help her. And three of the teachers that Kate just adored were Muriel Inman, who she took for French 1 and 2, her English teacher, Brittany O'Neill, and her ceramics teacher, Lisbeth Habib. All of these teachers took the time to make my daughter feel seen and make her feel special, which when you are a child, especially a girl on the autism spectrum, sometimes making friends is hard to do. So knowing that you had a teacher there to support you meant a lot to our family and to Kate. So I just wanted to really highlight a great success for our district and specifically for Williamsfield High School. I'm grateful to be a part of this district, and I'm grateful that my daughter attended our schools. Thank you.
Next, we have Mindy Brocker.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I hate public speaking, so please be patient with me. But, you know, meeting after meeting, there does seem to be a concerted effort from a very small segment of our community. But they're loud, and it seems like they wish to tear down public education, push parents towards ESA vouchers, and, in fact, shut down the Board of Education. They often question not only the professionalism and conduct of our HUSD educators, but their very morality. So I wanted to just take a minute today to tell you why I love my public school and the people that hold it up, because I think they should hear it. So I just want to say thank you to every teacher who smiled through the chaos and craziness that is the first day, parent and kid jitters alike. Thank you so much for standing in this horrible heat, endlessly waving car lines forward, and trying to repair car line issues that are endless. I want to say thank you to the bus drivers who always hit me with a smile and a wave, and they take my kids to and from school safely every day. Thank you to the virtual teachers who make it so that my children can take classes that they want to take, even with the teacher shortage and the chaos of staffing issues. Thank you to the health staff who are always kind and patient and help my kids when they don't feel well. We've already had that. Thank you to the teachers who spend hours in IEP meetings, who keep us up to date on their classes and how they're educating my children so that parents have a right to know what's going on. They also deal with endless emails from my children and from their mother. Thank you to the administrators who always help every time we ask with a smile. And finally, thank you to those teachers, the ones who make my children think, who teach them that they're valued, who partner with the parents to help us to create that next generation of leaders.
Thank you. Next, we have Adam Brocker.
Good evening. I'm a parent of 3 wonderful kids in our district. Our family has been here about 10 years now, and it's been a wonderful experience for us overall. Unfortunately, the reason I'm here this evening is that the conversation has gotten utterly toxic. I would like the board to discuss a code of conduct for social media for specifically board members. The reason I'm asking for this evening is one of the board members is specifically using their social media presence to identify specific teachers in our state and leading others to harass them. They are putting up all kinds of poisonous language, and specifically linking to those teachers' district staff page. This is not appropriate. It is not okay to direct this kind of harassment towards our teachers. There should be some sort of punishment for those kinds of actions. I don't care about what your politics are and how you choose to express them, but harassing teachers online is not and will never be okay. This person is a bully and should be ashamed of themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe it's Ira Latham. Was that right?
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you.
President Schultz, members of the board, and I don't know how to address y'all, but all y'all, thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm coming today as a father of 4 kids in the district, and as also a business owner. I'm going to speak specifically on the new dress attire recommendations. First, I want to thank everyone that's been involved in updating policy. It's a challenging thing to do, especially when you want to represent a whole community. So I understand that that's very difficult. Specifically, I wanted to address the vagueness of the new policy as opposed to the old policy. And my recommendation would be to relook at that and how we can integrate some of the older policies into the new policy. Vagueness I'm speaking of is the recommended new policy does not give enough specifications on what should be covered. It specifically talks about just the underwear areas and private areas, whereas the old policy specifically called out midriffs, modest chest covering. And the reason why I think this is specifically important for a father of kids is I was once a teenage boy. I remember how school was, and I understand how dress codes are important with regards to the classroom setting. I've had nothing but respect for higher education and education in general, and I think that creating a good, safe classroom environment is important. I understand the need to express yourself, but that's not the right place to do it in the classroom with regards to dress and attire. We need to kind of set a level playing field. As a business owner, I think that we're disservicing the children by not properly getting them the right expectations on what they're expected to once they leave the schooling system. I've never seen a business that I've ever either been in or been a part of, or even organization that doesn't have stricter dress requirements than the one that's outlined in the current policy. So as a business owner, I'm a little confused of the purpose of the dress code if it's not setting children up or students up for success after school. It would be my recommendation or my request for recommendation to be able to review the policy as regards to the old policy and see where we can kind of combine and make it a little bit better policy for the students, for the teachers, and as well for the community as large. Thank you.
Next, we have Monica Latham.
Members of the board, I want to say thank you. I know that this takes a lot of time and effort. You guys don't get paid for this. This is something that, takes a lot of time from out of your family. So I do want to say thank you for doing that, especially since we're all so busy. And so it just puts an extra thing on you. So, but I did want to address what happened last board meeting. It was very concerning to me to see a board member demean and talk down to another board member. It went on for about a minute or over a minute. We were supposed to be above that. We were supposed to help make rules that prevent that from happening in our classes and in our schools, and it was happening right here in this council. How can we help kids, teens, be kind to one another when we can't do it ourselves? We are all humans and should be treated as such. I hope that we can stop this from reoccurring. Just because it was done with educated words does not mean it was the right thing to do or should be allowed to continue. Everyone on this board earned their right to be here and represents different thoughts and ideas from all different people and all different families. A lot of families that I am part of also. And so I'm the spouse to Ira. And so we do have 4 kids here. And I have 3 kids at Chaparral Elementary. Go Sharks. A good mantra that they have it used to be 7 learning habits, now it's 8 habits to be a leader. And one of them is first seek to understand, then to be understood. And we should definitely be taking that into account and should not be doing what happened last meeting. Anyways, I also really wanted to quickly touch base with also the dress code. It's very vague. My husband and I have talked about it a lot. And when I was in high school, yes, it was over 10 years ago, under 10 years, but I had my best friend who developed early. She got pregnant at 16, and boys pursued her very quickly. And I can't imagine what's going on now with even more clothing, more skin that's being shown. So I would hope that we can re-evaluate this dress attire because I don't feel like it's covering up enough, especially it's way too broad. It is not helping our kids learn or excel in the classroom. And so I just don't understand with changing this, how it's going to help our kids study and learn and to do well in school. Thank you.
John Mason.
I'd like to take this from a personal approach. We frequently look at this in terms of an abstraction. A dress code is important, and I was thinking about my father who died some 6 or 7 years ago, and he did everything that he possibly could for our family. He was a humble, blue-collar worker. He had a hot, dirty, sweaty job. And seeing him come home was often very difficult because he had the kind of job where he got injured frequently. He had dirt under his fingernails, he had calluses, his hands would come home bleeding, and it was difficult to see. And when he came home, he looked horrible. The appearance was horrible. He didn't spend money on himself. He spent money on the family. He spent money so that way when I went to school, I could look presentable. He made that sacrifice for the family. And a dress code does matter. The other day, I saw a state employee, and she did not look professional. And we can call it discrimination, we can call it whatever, but I had an unfortunate encounter with a state employee. She didn't look unprofessional, and yeah, we could say that I discriminated against her, or my attitude was prejudicial. But you know, how you dress matters. I'd like to talk a little bit more about my father. He didn't make a lot of money. He made far less than a teacher. And he did everything possible so that way I could get a good education. He sacrificed. He was a very liberal Democrat. And he always wanted more money for the schools. He always wanted better pay for the teachers. And finally, I was a teacher, and I said, you know what, Dad? I make more than enough. I make far more than what you do. And quite frankly, Dad, you deserve to earn more money than I. We have to be careful when teachers take the high road and say, I deserve more, I work too hard, I work whatever. We got to think about the blue-collar workers who sacrifice, who work hard, who give everything so that way their kids can have the best. We have to think about, are we spending our money efficiently? Because this is the part that kind of got me when I was a teacher, is I'd see all this waste in the district, and yet we're always asking for more and more and more money. But let's look at how we're spending the money now. Let's show some respect for these hardworking blue-collar workers who give and sacrifice so that way we can have good schools. So let's think about how we're spending our money. Let's think about our dress code. Let's think about the future. Thank you very much for listening to me here today.
Next, we have Linda Payne.
School board members and administration. I'm here to talk about the dress code also. I decided to go out and ask several people. I've asked several people throughout the community how they feel about it. And they definitely feel like we need to, if anything, make it more modest. I talked to several of the young men in our community that are going to your schools, and they definitely feel the very same way. They feel like the school code is too loose, that the girls are showing way too much skin, and it's very hard for them sometimes to concentrate because they like to look at skin. And so I decided to go that route instead of, so that you school board members would understand that it's not just a few of us that are here, it's a whole community out there that really want to have a better dress code, and by making it more loose is not an answer. If anything, we should make it more modest. And I hope that you'll consider that and vote for us to not change it and maybe make it better going the other way to where it's more modest. Thank you.
Next, Heather Balk.
Good evening, board members. I have some additional comments that I'm just going to add here to you. I want to say thank you to the board members who have teacher experience, and they speak from a perspective of the profession that you guys represent. A lot of times I'm in the audience and there's so much I want to say, but I can't. So I appreciate it when board members do. The next thing I want to say is that no matter what a person has on their body, is wearing, is not wearing, skin is showing, is not showing, does not justify the inappropriate feelings or actions of others, period. Okay, off my soapbox. And now I wanted to read to you something that Steve Irvin, he is a former ABC News anchor. He wrote this back in 2018. It was near the start of school. So these are all of his words, not mine. Thank you for teaching, I said. In this case, it was someone I met randomly, a full-time educator working 1 day a week on the weekends just to make ends meet. It's a phrase I've used dozens of times, particularly in the last few months. I think it should become a custom in our community. Just like many of us habitually extend a hand to a veteran or a police officer or a first responder, we should show appreciation to teachers whenever we get the chance. Some might argue that teachers don't put their lives on the line, like the people who protect our community. Fair enough. On the other hand, there's a growing list of teachers who have given their lives to protect their students, and more will do so. It's not as if we've really addressed the problem of school shootings. Teachers serve the greater good. We trust them to protect our kids, to keep them safe. We ask them to guide our most precious citizens and help them find a path to a prosperous future. That service is worth a handshake, a cup of coffee. It's worth a simple act of gratitude. First responders don't hear it enough, and I suspect teachers don't either. Now is the perfect time to do it. It's the first day of school for many kids. Some districts have already been open for a couple of weeks. Say it to a teacher who watches your kids or your grandkids. Say it even if you don't have children. Drop a card or a note in the mail to your local school and ask them to share your sentiments with staff. And just in case I haven't said it enough, to any teacher reading this, thank you for teaching. Yours is one of the most important jobs in our community. You are vital to our future, and nothing I can say or do can equal your selfless effort to make our community a better place. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our request to speak. Now we'll move on to.
I'd like to address something, please. I'd like to address Mr. Adam Brocker for your comment. To state that there should be a code of conduct because I post inappropriate things on social media, I'd like to let you know that's an absolute lie. I barely ever post anything on social media, and when I do, it's my kids or my dog. Other than that, I don't post anything on my personal social media page. So I just want to let you know that that's an absolute lie. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. We have to remain decorum. Thank you. And that's a warning. And moving on to the consent agenda, 5.1 through 5.13, I make a motion that we approve the consent agenda.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Moving on to information items, 6.1, policy GBEBV, staff conduct with students. This is the first read, and Ms. Richards, we have a guest for this.
So President Schultz, members of the board, district administration is proposing changes to policy GBEBV, and this is the staff conduct with students. To ensure that we provide the best information possible, we've asked Jennifer McClellan to join us. She's a member of our legal council. She is here as a resource. And I did want to say that a couple of comments and questions came back, and I have shared those with Jennifer.
Madam President, members of the Governing Board and District Cabinet, thank you for letting me be here tonight. I want to give you a little bit of history about how this policy was developed, if that would be all right. So Higley Unified has been applied and is not currently transitioning to the trust model policies, the Arizona Risk Retention Trust model policies. But this policy comes from that body of work. And it was created by two attorneys who have represented your district in the past. Their names are Chris Welker and Dave Pioli, and they work with the primary law firm that defends school districts when school districts are sued as a part of sexual abuse and molestation cases. So this policy was very specifically developed to try to outline behaviors that, in their experience when litigating those horrific cases, are signs or warning lights regarding a potential inappropriate behavior. I have listened to the governing board meetings at which you had considered and reviewed this concern, and I do share the notion that some of these things taken in isolation might not be a terrible thing. So for instance, it says that they may not confide in a student on a personal and private matter. Well, there may be an occasion where a teacher would say, you know, I'm sorry your parents are getting divorced. My parents also got divorced, and that would be sharing personal information. However, that's not going to objectively, that is not going to subject a teacher to discipline or reporting or any of those things because it's inappropriate. However, in my career, we've had to discipline and terminate teachers and move them before the state board when they were sharing personal information about themselves, such as their own sex lives or things of that nature, where they were group chatting with children and were listening to the students share about their inappropriate relations with other peers and were then sharing about what happened to them when they were younger, things like that. So I do think that the policy itself is a good risk prevention procedure for you all to consider. One of the board members had raised two specific points, and I did reach out to the Wright, Welker, and Pioli firm to ask them about those items. The first item was the one I mentioned, inviting a student to confide in a staff member on a personal or private matter, unless it was a counselor. I do think that what Mr. Pioli had said was that he didn't think it precluded a teacher from making general inquiries about how a student is doing, nor does it mean that a teacher has to turn away from a student if the student volunteers personal information. So the specific language is meant to prohibit a teacher from trying to elicit that information from the students. So that's the first question. And the second point raised prior to the board meeting was the phrase peer-like language and behavior. And again, I think this is similar to a teacher sharing a story with a child that might be personal in nature. You're going to have to look at the totality of the circumstances when determining if that teacher should or shouldn't be subject to discipline. And I should be saying staff member, I'm saying teacher, but I do mean any employee. So for instance, if in the lunchroom a teacher calls a student bra and says, stop flexing, this is the limit of my knowledge of current speech, right? Thank you. But that's not going to, they're not going to be called out for doing that specifically. However, that trying to fit in with the peers is a concern from the defense posture. So that's what I would like to say about this matter. I know this is up for a first read, so you all are welcome to give input, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Mrs. Wade?
Thank you, President Schultz. I just wanted to say thank you, because those were my two questions specifically. The reason, I guess, for me that was the biggest concern was because I've had students who had change in behavior, social emotional behavior, i.e. I suspected they were depressed. And then having those conversations, because we see them more than the counselors do, we see those changes. They often won't say things to the counselor. And because of my taking the time to be like, hey, things look different, I've had kids who have had plans. I've had things in place, and we as teachers and staff, we have policies that we have to follow once these things are established. So that was my biggest concern. So hearing that obviously makes me feel more comfortable in terms of the ability for teachers to still engage with their students, still make their students feel safe and welcome, while obviously making sure that we create parameters to make sure that they are not essentially grooming, which is what all of those lead to. So thank you.
President Schultz, Ms. McLennan. Did I say that properly?
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
Perfect. What about when, let's say, a student sends an inappropriate selfie to a teacher that's unsolicited? What happens in that case? How is the teacher protected?
That's a good question. So this policy is meant to control the conduct of staff, not students. So that would be addressed through your student discipline policies, your student code of conduct. But certainly if a staff member receives an inappropriate communication from a student, they should report that to their building administration so that that building administration can take action. And that is the way in which the staff member would be protected by telling their administration of the concern.
And is that verbiage that we could add to the policy to allow teachers to know what steps to take when situations like that occur so that they're not in trouble, so they have clear guidelines as to what to do in those situations?
Certainly. I do think that might be a better point to raise with the next policy that you're going to talk about, which is JBEF. That's also on your agenda, maybe the third policy, yeah. So item 7.2 might more appropriate be there because that's the area where it talks about social media and cell phone use.
Okay. Perfect.
Mrs. Reese, thank you. Is there something, and maybe Mr. Walker can answer part of this too, is there training that we have our staff go through regarding grooming behaviors and things like that?
Sure. President Schultz, Board Member Reese. The staff does receive boundary expectation training, as well as things like Title IX and inappropriate conduct based on the governing board guidelines.
Okay. That's a required training?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I was just wondering if there was anything regarding that type of training that would be best also listed in the policy, or if it's required training, maybe that's just not necessary. So I just wanted to double check on that.
Mrs. Anderson, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, President Schultz. I'm glad this came forward. I brought this forward, I think, about a year ago. You may have been in the room. There were some additions I would like to recommend. For the sentence at the top or in the middle, it says, all personnel employed by the district are expected to relate to students of the district in a manner that maintains social and moral patterns of behavior consistent with community standards and acceptable professional conduct. And I didn't know if we could, or I'd like to request that we add state and federal laws to make it, to me, it sounds more serious and crystal clear about the behavior. And then you could also, the next paragraph down, again, it talks about ethical or professional standards, and expectations of the district governance, but if we could, again, add based off of state and federal laws.
Madam President, Ms. Anderson, certainly those changes are legally acceptable. So.
Also, is it, in the third paragraph, we have relationships between staff members and students that include dating, courtship, or romantic involvement. Can we not add grooming as, I would like to add grooming because.
You'd like to have, I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry, what? You couldn't hear me?
Yes.
Is it possible to add in the third paragraph, in addition to dating, courtship, and romantic involvement, to add the term grooming as another behavior or pattern that would be unacceptable relationship? No, we don't have a state law right now regarding grooming. I understand that. I've looked it up, and I'm hoping one day we will. But when people behave in such a way, they call it grooming. It is, and I do understand based on definition. I mean, you can go through and look up, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, the criminal activity of becoming friends with a child in order to try to persuade the child to have a sexual relationship. Another definition, an act or an instance of engaging in behaviors or practices intended to gradually condition or emotionally manipulate a victim over time, as through friendship, gifts, flattery, etc., in order to entrap the person in a sexually abusive or predatory relationship. And then I'm for sure, I would assume this policy would want to cover that behavior in those interactions.
Is that the same as courtship? Does that fall under courtship or? Right, not previously.
So, Madam President, Ms. Anderson, I'm looking through quickly just what state law says about this, and it says specifically that grooming behavior is not a criminal conduct until, but could you reference it within here? Yes, you could. I think perhaps the way to do it would be to state that maybe towards the end of the policy that these engaging in behaviors such as those listed above constitutes grooming and would be cause for discipline. Would that language along those lines? Okay, so I think it should go below the list of the 1 through 20.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and thank you for helping me understand. Okay. My question with the list of behaviors that teachers shall not engage in, I struggled with number 5, socializing with a student outside of school or a school activity. At games or dances, when we're chaperoning, like we're engaging, and they're so happy to ask me to talk to at times. So I don't know if you can, this might be like you explained with the other examples, it's obviously based on the situation. So I would read that and be like, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to talk to kids at the game. So I didn't know if there's a better way to state it, or if you can help us understand if that's how a one-off would go.
Madam President, members of the Governing Board, and Ms. Anderson, what you might consider doing is saying socializing with a student out of school or a school activity when such activity is directed at the individual student. Would that, so in other words, socializing in a group situation is something that you might be comfortable with, but if it's directed towards an individual student, similar to paragraph 6 that says giving or receiving a personal gift that singles out individual students. We could add that if you'd like.
So you're saying it would be more of a personal intent to go to something for that student? Is that, am I understanding you? Okay.
Again, I do think it's fine how it is in terms of the totality of the circumstances determining. I mean, if, for instance, if you have teachers who are family friends with other teachers and they get together at their home, they're certainly socializing. No one's going to be disciplined over that. So, but we can make it more specific if you want it to be.
Yeah, because I'm concerned with that as well, because, I mean, what if they run into each other at a grocery store, or they might attend the same church? There's, we all live in the same town. I mean, not every teacher, but there's a lot of teachers that live within the district too, so if they run into a student, I don't want them to get in trouble for talking to a student at church or at a grocery store. So I'd like to be able to make that more clear.
So I had brought this up in our initial meeting with Mrs. Richards about that, and then also, the personal gifts to students, and such as praise, giving a kid something for achieving a high score, those type of things. And this is a policy, and it's not, you can't do these things anymore. So I don't want our teachers to think that they can't give kids gifts. And I mean, 99.9% of everybody knows what's appropriate and not appropriate. But this is a policy that we have in place to protect us and the children and everything. But we don't want teachers to feel they can't talk to kids, and they can't, or staff, I should say, excuse me, can't talk to kids. Correct, Mrs. McClellan, and that they can give kids gifts, or if they have a star student who has a musical performance, an administrator could go to that certainly and support the student in a group setting. Correct?
Madam President, I do think that's correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So what
President Schultz?
Mrs. Reese?
I think, in my opinion, I think we're trying to read into the words a little too much, because Mrs. Anderson, everything you brought up there is a school activity. So I think people would want you as a teacher to socialize with the student section at a football game, things like that, because it is a school activity. Now, where I would become concerned is if a group of kids went out to IHOP after that football game and you went with them or met them there, then to me that's where I would read into that. Like, you certainly have business at the football game, at the dance, and interacting with the kids there. Kind of the afterwards, then any staff member really wouldn't have any business being there, obviously, unless you're with your own child, that's with a group of people, and things like that. And I think that's what we just have to take into consideration, like the context of that, of what are the circumstances. Same with Mrs. Van Hook with church. Well, I would hope their parents are going to church with them, and they all know that the staff members at the church, and they should know each other as well. And it goes beyond talking, like, oh, hey, how are you in the grocery store? We're not expecting our staff to turn around and run the other way because there's a student and they should be afraid of getting in trouble. This is saying that there's intent, like there's intent to go hang out with students at something other than a school activity. So I think it's the intent of it, not an accidental encounter. And your family's at the IHOP and their families, the students are there, hey, how's it going? And then you just kind of tend to your own things, instead of pulling up a chair, sitting with them, having conversation, and kind of involving yourself with them. That's when things could get concerning. And this is to protect our teachers, our staff, and and the students. It's protection all the way around if we have set guidelines. And Mrs. Schultz, with gifts, I would hope that there would be the expectation. I look at it from that whole K-12, that if someone did something really well, that the teacher is rewarding them because of a certain expectation, instead of, again, kind of reading into it going, well, it's their birthday, I'm giving them a birthday gift, and they're only giving a certain student a birthday gift. Like that's things we should stay away from. But educational, academic, art, theater, all those types of achievements, I wouldn't recommend necessarily a gift, but some type of recognition, some type of, like you said, award, things like that, I think is perfectly acceptable, and you're not doing it in a private setting versus giving someone very personal. So it's hard because, like Ms. McClellan said, any of these individually might not necessarily be concerning, but when there's the intent, I think is when then we have to take that situational and look at it.
Thank you for clarifying. I just wanted the language to be a little bit more clear because that can be misread and misinterpreted, and that was my only, but thank you for helping me understand it better, because I read that completely different, and if I did it, surely I'm not the only one.
Well, that's right, and I think that's the other thing we want to, tell our teachers and staff and kids, that it's okay, or that, please, yes, yeah, go to these things, support your kids, talk to them at football games, incentivize. If, you have a kid that is struggling and you want them to pass a certain test, then it's okay to give an incentive or a reward for those kids. It's the intent where we'd have an issue, and the policy is overall to protect everyone and not micromanage.
Madam President, members of the board, so the language I added there for item 5 would be socializing with a student outside of school or a school activity that's so as to single out an individual student.
Thank you.
President Schultz, Ms. Oh, gosh, I'm sorry. I'm messing up your name again. Being an attorney, like, words matter when it comes to laws. So if it's intent, then we want to be sure to say that in the verbiage to make it as clear as possible. And I mean, even with the gift, if it's, maybe adding, for educational purposes or some sort of verbiage that just specifies versus having it so vague. Another concern I had was for number 1, about flirtatious communication and commenting on students' dress. So I know, a lot of kids come to school with cute outfits on or whatever, and, teachers can say like, hey, your outfit's cute. So does that mean that won't be allowed?
Madam President, Ms. Van Hook, I do think that's an important point to be raising, because again, if you take any of these individually, you're going to have to look at the context in which the statement is made. So telling a kindergarten boy who comes to school that you love his ball cap and he looks great today is certainly not going to be inadvisable. But telling a male high school student that the outfit that he has on, is very, something that the teacher really appreciates. It's not, that's going to be strange, right, to the high school boy. So I do think it's going to be the context in which the statement's made that would be actionable or not actionable. The word flirtatious before the communication, I think, is important. So telling a student that they look great today isn't flirtatious.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mrs. McClellan.
Of course.
Moving on to action items. 7.1, I move that we approve policy JICA, student attire, second read.
Seconded.
Questions, comments, concerns?
President Schultz.
Mrs. Van Hook?
I do have a lot of concerns about the updated policy. The fact that we did remove midriff, I think, is a problem, and that would apply to both males and females. Having kids come to school in a tube top, or boys wearing their football jerseys that are cut to where their midriff is showing. I think those are things that that we need to consider. It is a distraction, and it's not only a distraction to other students, but it is a distraction to staff as well. I believe that it also puts staff in a situation where they don't feel comfortable dress coding. When we have a policy, we want the policy enforced, but a lot of cases, staff is hesitant on enforcing those policies because of the fear of being accused of sexual harassment, or for a teacher to say, I'm sorry, your shirt isn't appropriate, especially a female teacher to a male student, or a male teacher to a female student. And that puts our staff in a really bad situation. I'd like to read a statement that I wrote. Some people believe that a dress code sexualizes children, when in fact it is the opposite. Asking kids to wear proper clothing doesn't make them feel bad about their bodies. It teaches them to have self-respect, that there's a place for different types of clothing, and school is a place where they have to dress appropriately. I'm not saying let them wear uniforms or we follow a fingertip rule when evaluating the length of a skirt, a top, or shorts. But there needs to be standard which apply to both girls and boys. Kids shouldn't be allowed to wear tops that reveal their stomachs all the way to their chest, their butt cheeks hanging out, and their chest, bras, or their underwear being exposed. This should apply to both sexes. Yes, we all have the same body parts, but that doesn't mean we should all walk around naked. Whatever policy we decide to go with, we need to ensure that it is strictly enforced. We know that there are students who leave the house one way and change at school. When our schools enforce the policy, it also helps parents to be able to tell their kids that they can't wear something to school. So it makes it easier for parents to be able to enforce it at home too. That's all.
Mrs. Reese?
I think we've made some progress. We had a lot of good conversation. We talked about the difficulty in buying clothes that everyone would agree on, things like that, what's the trends and everything. I can't support this policy at this time because it is too vague. I don't want, it's too hard to say where significantly interferes with district's ability to maintain order, such as disrupting schoolwork. When we had more specifics, it also depended on the teacher. And let's be real, when we're talking dress codes, we're talking middle through high school. Most of these issues aren't with our K-6. So these are kids who change classes and have multiple teachers, and what one teacher may find acceptable, another one wouldn't. So a student could literally go through 5 class periods in a day, and in their 6th period, they could be dress coded, and they're going, what? I've worn this all day the same way. I didn't have a coat on. I didn't have anything. And to me, that sends the wrong message to our students, that because it was their last hour teacher that may have decided it was something that was disruptive to that class, and maybe that's the only class it was disruptive to. That's very possible. However, I agree. I think it's too vague. I want an appropriate dress code that meets the needs of our student, the needs of our community, where students can express themselves, where they can be comfortable, but where they know the expectations and that the expectations are clear. And for me, the most important is that we have consistent enforcement. And to me, like I said, it is too vague. And so I have a difficult time supporting this particular policy in that fashion. As Ms. Van Hook referred to, then you can have a student who, if it's a female student who is addressed by a male student or a male student addressed by a female staff, they're picking on me. No one else said anything. Only this teacher said something. And maybe it is a staff member that a student might have a little conflict with. We're all human, it happens. And maybe that's the staff member that addresses it. And you talk to the other staff members or teachers that student had, and they're like, well, I didn't see anything wrong with it. I didn't see anything wrong with it. I think it just sets us up for having too inconsistent enforcement.
Mrs. Reese, what would you like to see added to it?
I mean, that's a great question. I think I think we were way too specific to begin with, don't get me wrong. And I don't want teachers to have to two-finger rule. Is it thick enough? Is it put your fingertips? Is it long enough? Staff has enough to do other than do regulation in that fashion. And I don't have an answer for that. I honestly don't have an answer specifically. I just read it as it is. And how do you enforce that consistently?
Well, when I look at exposes where the undergarments or undergarments area, that's all very specific. I don't know, like you said, you don't know what to add. So if we don't know what to add, then where do we go from here?
Madam President?
Sure, but I was having a conversation with her. Yes.
Out.
Yeah.
Can I give my
May I offer a suggestion?
Yes, please.
So your prior language that when, again, this language comes from the work of the 4 law firms that developed the Arizona Risk Retention Trust student attire policy. The prior language states forbid, interferes with or disrupts the educational environment or educational objectives. So if Ms. Reese is comfortable with that prior language, which is a little bit less specific, you could sub out that paragraph.
I'm still trying to think how.
I mean,
I mean, here we have previous teachers. How do you enforce that based on this language? What would you guys?
And again,
Can Mrs. McClellan give her professional legal opinion on that for us?
Sure. Again, there exists that in your existing policy that you forbid students from wearing something that interferes with or disrupts the educational environment or educational objectives. The language that's proposed says it has to significantly interfere with their ability to maintain order. I do think that Ms. Reese's point is that dress codes in any way that they're written could be applied without fairness, let's say. And that's going to be an issue no matter how tight we make the language. That's an issue of how you enforce the policy, not how it's written. So I do think the language in that first bullet is more specific than what you have, but if what you have you're happy with, you can go back to that.
I guess I'm referring to, in our previous policy, there was a little more specific items as to what was considered okay and what was not.
And I would just offer also to the board that the dress code policy that you are considering here is not the final say as to how the administration is going to enforce that. So they're going to take the policy that the board creates and they're going to write it up into your student handbook and potentially create a regulation that you all would review. So for instance, I've been just checking, we have 10 districts that have adopted this, and a few of them have created very specific regulations that get very detailed about what types of things are and are not prohibited. So for instance, in one district,
I guess if I saw a regulation that would matter.
And so, for instance, in one district, they say that clothing fabric must cover all private body parts and undergarments can't, the same language that you have in that exposes about the wearer's undergarments, very specific. Students may wear clothing and jewelry that display religious messages. Footwear such as shoes, sandals, or boots may be worn in the school building. Footwear must be safe and non-destructive to school property. Clothing may not cover a student's face. So it gets more specific in the regulation. All of your policies are designed to do that, to have this sort of broad goals that you all adopt as a board to lead your district, and then the administration can work on some of these more nuanced calls. So to your point, Ms. Reese, we don't want to have teachers be measuring 2 fingers to determine if the strap, or we don't want someone walking around with a yardstick to determine if somebody's skirt's too short. But the regulation could address some of these interpretation concerns that you're having.
President Schultz, Ms.
Just one
McLennan.
second. Sorry, Mrs. Anderson was asking to
I'm
speak
sorry.
next. And then we'll get to Ms. Fick.
Sorry, I just didn't want decision to be made without input. Thank you. Okay. I decided to write my position on this policy in an attempt to keep my points focused and to manage my speaking time better. These public meetings are the only time the 5 of us can speak to each other without breaking the law, so we often have to put together sophisticated, clairvoyant thoughts, but many times we get wordy, choppy, or off topic, so please bear with me as I read. First, I want to address some misinformation being shared regarding statements I made about this policy at the May 10th board meeting. There may be individuals here tonight or listening online who are concerned about what they were incorrectly told about what I said. In an email that was sent, the writer said, quote, "I suggested that male teachers struggle to maintain appropriate behaviors with female students due to the attire of said students," end quote. And that I have been, quote, "the topic of discussion amongst our community of parents and students since it happened," end quote. So here's the transcript of what I said. You can go listen to it. You can click transcript on YouTube and it'll put it out there, right there for you. I said, professional attire is how do we expect teachers to dress? So no, teachers aren't walking around with midriffs showing, and they're definitely not walking around with their back end hanging out of their shorts. But I will agree that it is terribly difficult to find clothes that cover my body, which I have been left to dressing like back in my days when I was a tomboy. Everything I wear is sports shorts and a t-shirt because it's the only thing that I can find that fits well. This is going to be a difficult conversation because there are going to be agreements on how we raise our children and how we find what is appropriate for our children. And we are trying to make decisions for other people's children. What I want to point out are the statements I've heard from teachers where I teach and how the adults feel uncomfortable with the clothes and the body parts they are seeing on these children. So we need to make sure we take that into account when we make these decisions, whenever males and females are seeing girls with very short shirts and very short shorts, and their busts are busting out. I'll stop there. But that's the point to understand, teacher professional attire. So when we talk about what is professional attire, let's go look at businesses and let's see outside the schools what's going on in businesses and what is their attire if we're going to dress in professional attire. Also, how do the teachers feel and what are their thoughts about some of the dress they are seeing around the school, especially when we have had instances with behavior between teachers and a teacher and a student as an issue before. Not once did I state or suggest that male teachers struggle to maintain appropriate behaviors. In fact, my entire approach is addressing the distraction of certain student attire towards females and males. I use the terms adults, teachers, females, and males. And we have a policy on the agenda tonight addressing staff conduct with students. Students and teachers will seek to distract and gain attention, not only through behavior and verbal cues, but also with their attire. In fact, there is language in that policy addressing teacher comments on student attire. So moving on, I am not in support of the revised language of policy JICA. I do not support the removal of the terms exposes midriffs, exposes the chest, and exposes the buttocks. I'm going to state my reasoning not based on my feelings and beliefs, but rather focus on what the purpose of our school district is. From our website, from our mission statement, we empower students to be responsible citizens with the knowledge, skills, and work ethic required for success in their future endeavors. We are an innovative district that prepares learners for limitless opportunities. Our core values are integrity, connections, learning-centered, and accountability. No matter where you look on our strategic plan, the vision is teaching and learning, student success. I would assume that most parents, guardian students attending the Higley schools want students' state-mandated time in school to not be wasted and to be utilized for preparing students to be more knowledgeable, critical thinkers, confident, and prepared for college and/or whatever the next steps are after high school. But not just those attributes. Most want students to be competitive, capable, and comparable for colleges and careers. They want scholarship money, in which much of that funding is based on merit. To achieve and acquire such things takes commitment, dedication, quality staff, focus, and removal of distractions. Students have to want to succeed and want to be at school. There is much prodding and cheering as they progress, because for a lot of students, school is not fun, it's not interesting, or it's not even a priority. There are strategies parents and educators use to motivate students and help them learn without knowing they are learning, to find value in content and find value in themselves. One strategy, and this is not only utilized in schools, it is also in most workplaces, is dress for success. There are studies and articles on this. Even Scientific American quoted and states, quote, "The old advice to dress for your job you want, not the job you have, may have roots in more than simply how others perceive you. Many studies show that the clothes you wear can affect your mental and physical performance." But we don't need to hear other people tell us this, because all of us have experienced it. When we go to interviews or job events or formal outings, we dress in a particular way. When we want to relax, be disconnected from responsibility, and feel free of demands, we dress in a different way. There is a time and place for styles and specific attire. Our original policy does not mandate that students dress in suits and slacks and body-length skirts, long-sleeve shirts, or turtlenecks. It's 100% allows for current styles, comfortable clothes, and comfortable shoes to be worn. I went to the websites for male and female junior and adult clothing on Walmart, Target, Tilly's, Dillard's, Macy's, H&M, and Old Navy. And the majority of clothing offered is well within our current dress code policy. And yes, school is a professional setting. It is a job/life prep/training. Students can earn money for meeting and exceeding benchmarks in the form of scholarships. And I was given the data for scholarships. Of course, it's buried in all my paperwork, but tens of millions of dollars. This is what students are striving for in our district. Sorry, I'm passionate. If I'm yelling, I'm not yelling. I apologize. Ooh, I need to chill. All right. Also, our current dress code is appropriate for a learning environment with reduced distractions, and not just attraction distractions, but also the distraction of feeling pressure to dress provocatively, of being judged, of being pressured to fit in, pressured to meet popularity trends that could instill shame. And it reduces academic distractions for teachers. The current policy is clear on expectations and reduces subjective assessments and strives for consistency across classrooms and sites, like Mrs. Reese was bringing up. Our current dress code enables students to exercise self-respect, self-control, and discipline. As a parent and teacher, I would be okay if my child left high school not knowing what a chemistry mole is, but learned and practiced attributes of self-respect, self-control, and discipline. In addition to being knowledgeable and a critical thinker, these attributes set people apart from others and make them more reliable, confident, and valuable. My apologies. I'm almost done. I think it would be safe to assume that if our district was listed as one of the top 100 schools in the nation, we would be beyond proud of everyone involved and would not only embrace that accolade, but we would shout it from the rooftops. So what I did is I used the U.S. News Best High School Rankings. And since this is a source widely used across our nation, I used it to identify their top 100 schools, and then, I kid you not, I looked up every single one of their dress code policies. This has taken me weeks, and I have 60 pages of information from every single dress code from every single of the top 100 schools in the nation. And of the 100, there were only 3 that had a very, dress appropriately, but left it up to whatever that was very, very beyond this vague. All of the others, and there were several others, I believe, more than 3, there were 14 that actually used uniforms. And many of them, the dress codes far exceed what we have for expectations of how students dress. And some of them I was like, good Lord, what are they going to wear? Ours, I feel, is extremely lax compared to the others. Those are schools at the top 100. Only 3 had dress codes that were not straight up, please don't wear this and don't do that. And then their little intro statements were fantastic of explaining why. Professionalism, self-control, discipline. You're representing our district. Look professional, were a lot of the statements. Additionally, the language in the amended policy is counterproductive and will not work. And let me show you what I mean. Under Section A, the 4th bullet down, the last sentence, it states towards the end, however, undergarments may not be worn as clothing. Thank goodness, right? Well, that will not work because there are popular clothing items that are available as both shirts/tops. They're also in the undergarments. All right? Per the same websites that I mentioned earlier, the following items are identified in both shirts and tops, and they're also under undergarments. I don't even know this word, I haven't even heard of it. A brando, a tube top, undergarment, and undershirts. A camisole, a brammy, crop tank, halter top, seamless, tiny tank, and a cropped cami. And I just stopped there because I was tired of looking at underwear on little kids, honestly. And I did this, and I looked under, again, male and female. Of course, males aren't going to have a lot of these items, but I looked under both. How are the teachers going to be able to determine whether that's an undergarment or an article of clothing that you would buy under regular attire? So if we allow the exposure of midriffs, which a lot of these are, these undergarments / maybe tops, then we are creating an enormous amount of distraction for teachers from teaching, as they have to try to police whether the tops are undergarments or not, which they should not have to do. And then the likelihood of consistency across classrooms and sites is slim to none. Even without trying to determine what type of clothes are being worn, as Mrs. Reese stated in May, how much midriff will be allowed? Teachers should absolutely not have to determine that. And again, the likelihood of consistency across classrooms and sites will be slim to none. And same with exposure of chest and buttocks. It's the same. Per my stated reasonings, again, I am not in support of the revised language of policy JICA. I do not support the removal of the terms exposes midriffs, exposes chest, and exposes buttocks. The language in the whole agenda applies to and is inclusive to males and females and should be enforced consistently and equitably for males and females. Males need to dress under the same expectations and not show their midriff, buttocks, and expose their exposed chests. This is valid for transitioning students as well. After speaking to multiple school principals, which I went out and talked to them, statistically, as they stated, across principals, it is females who violate the dress code with overexposure more often, and it's the males that violate the dress code with inappropriate content on their clothes more often. And as language states, you can't have sexually suggestive content on clothes, but we're going to allow girls to dress provocatively. And you better believe it, I Googled specific terms. What is provocative dress? What is immodest dress? And crop tops and tight clothes, every time. And you Google professional attire and go to images, it's not turtlenecks and long sleeve shirts and skirts to the ground. It's as we are sitting in this room. I recommend we add the language back in and maintain an academic and professional environment with fidelity and consistency. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. I have a question, Mrs. Anderson. When you said you researched districts, did you look at the other schools around, districts around us and what they've adopted?
Absolutely, I did.
Because I know for a fact that Gilbert has adopted the same policy that this policy and the other districts around us, including Queen Creek. Mrs. McClellan, you also said that, I'm sorry?
I said they're not top 100.
Okay. You said other districts have adopted this, and legally speaking, this is a policy that then would have regulations after that. So we're not asking teachers to, like, with two fingers or say what an undergarment is. There'd be regulations that Mr. Walker and our cabinet would put in place. This is a policy that we're adopting that is a broader policy, correct?
Madam President, that's correct. You're creating the policy statement for the district, and then the district staff would create the implementation, which could include a procedure or a regulation.
And speaking with Mr. Walker last week, he mentioned that we would do this across the board. Everybody would be on the same page, correct? And all the policies would, the policy would reflect across the entire district.
President Schultz, members of the board, that's always the goal with policy, that we create a district policy, not an individual site policy. There would be some site-based nuances, for example, HTA with uniforms, that would be a different function within the policy, but the policy would apply to the whole school district.
So I realize we all have different beliefs and passions, and what is this? It's a policy that we're creating that then we would entrust our cabinet to regulate, and not our teachers or individuals or anything like that, or inappropriate behavior. And I trust our cabinet would do that and regulate that across the district.
What would it matter if the language is in the policy or in the regulation? And if I understand, the board members do not have to approve a regulation. So we have to be in trust that that regulation is written as a majority of the board would hope that it would be, to take the burden off the teachers and to be crystal clear and bring back coverage to the student body.
So, Madam President, members of the governing board, if it's your desire to add back into the policy that midriffs are covered, that's an easy fix to this. You could either add the language in that you had previously, or just put the word exposes the wearer's midriff, undergarments. That's one fix. I do have another district that defined midriff a little more specifically. Let me try to find it. It's Kyrene's. So they defined the clothing fabric must cover all body part, let's see, Clothing must cover the entire midriff with material that covers the front, back, and sides. So that's in their regulation. You could put that language in your policy if that's what you wanted to be in terms of policy making, to be more specific.
Can you repeat that again for me?
Sure. So this language would say clothing must cover the entire midriff with material that covers the front, back, and sides. So you already have suggested clothing must cover all private body parts, which I think covers, you know,
That's what I'm confused about. Where it's very specific in here, so I'm having trouble realizing how we're not specific, because it's entirely, that entire paragraph is very specific.
President Schultz, I do like the wording that says to cover front, sides, and back. That provides a little more coverage there and more specificity. But I also want to piggyback on what Michelle said. Our strategic plan says to make kids career and college ready. And we can't do that by allowing kids to wear whatever they want. They need to be able to fit within our strategic plan. If we are going to keep pushing the strategic plan and working on it and ensuring that, you know, it's district-wide and being enforced, then we need to ensure that our dress code matches what we are trying to do for our district.
I have a question. What profession are we trying to fit them into with the dress? So I hear you say dress professional. Well, but if I own a comic book store, I'm going to wear a comic book shirt. If I'm a model, I'm going to wear the latest fashions. If I own my own business or I own a boutique, I'm going to wear that as well. So I don't understand what profession we're molding them into that they can't wear the style that is right now. I mean, like I said, I'm not asking for them to, or for us to say, you know, go naked, wear your undergarments. I don't understand why we're regulating so strictly for profession and how that matters.
No matter what career field it is, if you show up not dressed appropriately, there's a pretty good chance that you're not going to be considered for that position. We have standards for our teachers. If our teachers showed up to interview dressed like some of our children in the district, I can guarantee you they wouldn't be hired. So if we are prepping our children to be college and career ready, then they need to learn to be able to have self-respect. And that doesn't include showing off their body parts. And you know what? Sometimes adults have to be adults. And I know it was mentioned to have a student council so they can put their input, but as I've said about other things before, if we allow children to make these decisions, we end up with what we have. And adults have to be adults, and as parents, it makes our job at home easier when we know that school's going to enforce the policies. And it makes our job easier to say, no, you can't wear that to school. But when our schools aren't, it's not clear and we don't have a proper policy, then it makes it harder for us at home to go, no, you're not leaving the house like that. Because, oh, all the other kids are wearing it. So we are in the education business, and that is the purpose for us, and we need to ensure that we are providing an environment where kids come to learn and concentrate on academics, and not a popularity contest or who dresses what or who wears what.
Madam President.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Ms.
I just, one last thing. Even in My oldest went to charter. Even there, obviously, charter has a uniform and they have a strict dress code, but my daughter left the house one day in a black shirt. Well, black shirts aren't allowed. I had to drive all the way to school to take her a red shirt or a gray shirt, you know, because black shirts weren't allowed. So what did that teach my daughter? Mom had to leave work to come and you know, bring me something that so I can change. And it didn't happen again. So we need to ensure that we're doing what is best for the kids. And as a parent, as an adult, if kids like us all the time, we're not doing our jobs. So that's all.
Madam President. So I think, obviously, this policy as it stands, we're going to have to keep doing those types of things because clearly we have differing opinions. I think what is important for us here on the board, considering we are 5 different individuals who have 5 different perspectives on things, and we are representing a community of individuals who have different perspectives, there are a couple things that I would at least like to address or pose as questions to those of you who are uncomfortable with the policy that's in front of us. A lot of you talk about there's inconsistency currently. And so if we keep the current policy, I don't really understand how that gets rid of what clearly is an inconsistent problem, right? Your argument is this is inconsistent and the policy we have in place is inconsistent. I think part of that nature or part of the reason it's inconsistent is because we have a differing group of moral standards. And so when we're trying to create a set of quote unquote moral standards, we have to be reflective and look within ourselves to remove where we're standing from and look at what the intent of the policy is. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, our intent is to ensure the educational environment, right? And so currently, as Ms. Van Hook expressed, what we currently have in place, learning seems to be going on just fine, right? I recognize that there are differing opinions or differing moral standards, what I would choose to wear. I'm not personally comfortable wearing certain things, and the individuals around me may also have varying levels of what is comfortable or what is, quote, moral. We have to be very careful when we represent a community of differing morals to set, quote unquote, moral standards, because who gets to decide when it comes to some of these moral standards? Our focus needs to be the impact it has on education. So I recognize the difficulty with that, and we are in a difficult position to try to create some of these things. I think there are potential problems when we get overly specific, because at the end of the day, we can't think of certain types of scenarios until they happen. I also think it's important to recognize that the school our kids attend is very different than the school each of us attended as adults, because things are very much have changed, and that's part of social norms. We constantly change as a society. And if you look around, and I recognize that there are still individuals who have problems, and ultimately within your home you get to decide what these things are, I don't think it's fair for us to say that we as schools need to help you parent because you're having a hard time creating established boundaries within your home and all of these types of things. And I say that, again, as a parent. And that's a hard standing, but I don't think it's fair to put education in that position because, again, your moral standards may differ than somebody else's moral standards, and we're constantly setting people up for failure, essentially, and I struggle with that. Ultimately, what I look around at is I look at how are our schools currently doing? And I look at the policy that's in place, and in my opinion, I feel like this policy is reflective of what we have kind of settled on as a community in terms of functioning day in and day out, because the policy we have in place is not strictly adhered to because it was written in 2001, and so we have, over the course of 20 years, kind of changed and morphed as we as a society have changed and morphed. And I think that aspect is important because, again, we're representing a community of individuals, and learning is still done. It still happens on a frequent basis, and we are doing remarkably well here in Higley. And so I guess my question to those who are not necessarily here yet, that when it comes to what decisions it is that you're trying to make, I guess my hope for you is to keep in mind that you have your own set of things, and that may differ, but all of us have the same goal of keeping the educational environment as successful as it can be. And right now, that seems to be going on just fine. All of us have received a number of emails. We've had several people speak here today with respect to the dress code. And a lot of them have talked about these are the things that they're seeing and why that makes them uncomfortable. And I understand and I respect everybody's stance and what they deem to be moral or appropriate, et cetera. But yet learning is still happening just fine, right? And that's important. I also wish to challenge some of the adults as an individual who spent their entire career teaching high school students. And we all, to get to this age had to be a teenager. Teenagers, like people in general, are really good at being able to recognize in this scenario, this is appropriate, and that scenario, it's not. You can have kids who would dress what you deem as morally appropriate. Our straight A students always do their homework and everything else, and when they leave here, they're still not prepared to do things. You have some kids who barely got by with that D average, and honestly, the conversations we had, I was like, I don't know how you are even here sometimes with some of the things that they're doing, and they go on to be overwhelmingly successful. I think we tend to miss the mark when we try to focus on what is important to us rather than looking at what is the goal and the intent of the policy. I struggle to see how in an environment in which, and I recognize why, for example, the focus tends to be on tube tops, which again, disproportionately impacts women. I don't see how you can create appropriate language that A, would be consistent, because as we've already discussed, that's not happening. And part of that reason, again, is varying morals, so that's a struggle. With respect to the cabinet members and how they create some of these regulations on these types of things, I think it's important to be reflective of what our kids are capable of, how they are doing these types of things. And with respect to distractions and the like, as a parent especially, I demand more of my children in that I don't expect that they're going to exist in a world in which they will not be distracted by things. And I don't expect that they are going to be able to function if we create as safe as a bubble as I think is appropriate in what we have in our household, because the second they leave here and they go to other parts of the community, college, job, et cetera, all of these things, that's going to happen. And so if our goal is to prepare them for things beyond, I don't see how a policy that is reflective of what currently is happening creates anything less than the success that Higley is currently dealing with.
President Schultz.
Mrs. Reese?
Mrs. Whedon, I hear you, I do. But the one thing that concerns me is, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, so just as I heard it, is learning still happening, so it doesn't matter that our current policy is not being followed. So policy not being followed, learning can still happen, and that's okay. So, I mean, that's what I heard. So I'm not trying to say that was your intent. I agree, and I'm not trying to say anything. I'm not trying to make a moral statement. Everyone has different morals. Everyone has different perspectives. I hear what everyone's saying regarding professional attire, and I'm not even asking for that. I think that there needs to be set boundaries, set expectations, and with anything, any parts of our lives, there are rules, whether it's what we wear, what we say, what we do, there are rules we have to follow. And part of that educational journey is testing those boundaries, as they should be, because that's how we learn, is testing the boundaries and understanding the boundaries. And for me, there is nothing specific in this policy. it is all very much so open to interpretation. I didn't go look on websites to see what's crossed into categories, but it is all very open to interpretation. And again, policies made to protect the district, to protect our students, and to protect our families. And I also think about the conversation with a principal or a dean, an assistant principal, of having a conversation with a parent where someone felt that what they were wearing was inappropriate, and the parent says, "What's wrong with you? It's fine." How does that conversation go? Because it's so vague, and saying, I just don't understand what my student was wearing. How did it cause, and I hear Mrs. McClellan say we can change some of the wording, but what we have here, how does it cause a significant disruption? Because I don't see that as a disruption as a parent. And that's a difficult conversation for our principals and our deans to be able to have, because there is nothing concrete. Then we do get into morals and what I may feel is okay and what you may feel is okay. And so the policy, I think, needs to, I'm not asking for lockdown specifics. I do think it needs to have more guidelines. I do think it has to have more specifics. I like the recommendation. I do trust our administration with a regulation, but, and I know the board doesn't approve regulations, but I would like to know where that stands. And quite honestly, if it can be a regulation, why could it not be in the policy if we're going to say this is acceptable and this isn't?
To be clear, oh, sorry. I was just going to respond to correct what it was my intent was by that statement, in that we already have a dress code in place, but you see female students and male students with midriff exposed. And I find that to be a hard thing to consistently express, right? To consistently enforce. And what is in place currently in terms of how we informally enforce said dress code across the board, in my opinion, seems to be reflective of the policy that's in front of us, in that the policy talks about essentially genitalia or areas that would be covered, so the buttocks with which you were talking about. As an individual who developed early, there was very little shirts that I could wear in which I did not have cleavage exposed. And the idea that you routinely had staff members who would comment on it made me feel all kinds of ways for things that I literally cannot control. And so I think the idea of other people being uncomfortable or distracted is not the responsibility of the individuals who are living and existing in their lives, in terms of, I am not inviting you to do things, I have not given consent to do things, I am not showing specific aspects that would get me arrested, you know what I mean, in terms of private areas kind of deal. I struggle to see how we can create a policy that does not have the potential to create inconsistency when we do certain types of things. So I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm not saying that I would never support certain things. I just, from the things that I'm hearing, don't hear what those changes would be that fix the problems that the three of you are expressing exist with respect to inconsistencies and how it's enforced. I just don't hear where the solution is.
Mrs. Reese, so when Mrs. McClellan said the language that we previously had interferes with or disrupts the educational environment or educational objectives, correct? Is that we already have in place? That's where...
I've not been happy with that one either. I mean, and that's why we've talked about for several years bringing the dress code back. What's currently in place is not great either. That's what I'm saying. So there's issues with both, and how do we merge them and make it right? Me personally, I don't have an issue with spaghetti straps or tank tops. Me personally, I don't have an issue with that. I don't see that as any overexposure. And so, I mean, there's parts of both that I like and I don't like. And so like I said, I don't know what the answer was. To be quite honest, I mean, I'm just going to be honest, based on some of our conversation previously, I was not expecting a policy this vague to come before us.
One of the things that concerns me, which I mentioned to Mrs. Anderson, is what other districts have done and the policies they put in place, and Higley being laughed at in a sense that we have such an archaic policy that does discriminate against women by adding something like a midriff back in. This policy was done in 2001. It's 2023. The other surrounding districts around us have adopted this and presumably have not had. I mean, I haven't heard anything. I feel like it would have been on Go Gilbert or something like that, that they have had issues. And I think this brings us to where we are at, and, you know, covers the private areas, the undergarments, waistbands, all of those things, and letting our district determine exactly the requirements for that.
This doesn't discriminate against women or females with a midriff, because it applies to males as well. They do not need to, and we do not want to see them. When I talk to female and male teachers, I had conversations with them. They don't want to see exposed skin in areas on either male or females. And as it was stated, there are males that will come out of sports or whatever, and they'll have the half shirts on, dress coded. Go ahead and put on a t-shirt and cover your midriff, because it's policy and you fall under that exact same policy. You are not special in any way where you can't wear a half shirt, or you can wear a half shirt. So I don't think it discriminates. And if we have an issue with following up with this policy with staff, then that's a training that needs to happen. And then that needs to be made crystal clear. But it's not the policy's fault, it's the implementation's fault. And I think, again, like Ms. Reese stated, it needs to be more clear. It's easier to follow, it's easier to mandate when we have clear expectations for our staff and for our students and for parents. I think that's the fairest thing we can do. And I don't think any of us, for sure, want to hurt or discriminate against any person in this district. And the question regarding what specific job, we're not talking about a specific job. We're just talking about a job in general. Any job, whatever the dress may be, where you have to practice self-control, self-respect, and discipline. It'll be different across.
Exactly, it's different. So
right.
How are we to determine what that is?
Well, we're going to teach them, because we don't know. We don't we don't know where every student's going to go, and not every job is as lenient as other. Just like every school dress code isn't as, like I said, we're very less conservative compared to many other school districts. But we're preparing them to whatever job they go into, whether it be very lenient or not. Either way, they can practice self-control. Because they'll obviously, a lot of kids will change jobs. It'll go from one way to the other, but they'll be prepared either way to say, okay, I've got self-discipline, I have self-control, and I can follow the policy of this job, whereas the other job was more lenient. And that's how I see it. If I see it differently, I apologize.
I'm coming from a place that there are many different views and morals and what you consider self-control and, you know, showing your stomach, or others might not. And I don't want to come up with a policy that is based on my moral beliefs, my religious beliefs, as much as I don't want to tell anyone to tell me what to wear. And I don't understand the point of self-control and what we're saying as far as the adding a midriff.
Because it helps them to practice. It helps them to practice it. It's just one thing. Midriff is just one thing in this policy. There's going to be other opportunities. Self-control, don't cheat. study, brush your teeth, wash your body. There's other things in which they need to eat healthy, in which they need to practice self-control. But I understand that this is to this policy, so lots of things they have to. But either way, not every job's going to be the same, so they have to be able to be. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I have no idea where to start.
President Schultz, Ms. McLennan.
If you have an issue with not being able to hear, please ask Mrs. Zimmerman to address us in that and not yell out from the audience.
Did you work with anybody on this updated policy?
Madam President, Ms. Van Hook. So I was a part of the team of lawyers that created the updated policy. This was not a policy that I particularly wrote, but I was a part of the team that reviewed them. I remember discussion about the changes to the paragraph that Ms. Reese is talking about. So, yes.
And did you work with any board members or Ms. Richards?
So the proposed language, again, comes from the model policies the trust created. When those were created, they were vetted before various board members and other administrators. Ms. Richards was not one of those administrators. So I do think that it's a state.
Okay, so the revised policy was not discussed with any board member prior to the meeting?
Oh, no.
Got it, okay,
I'm
thank
sorry.
you.
I thought you meant generally.
No, it's okay.
In general, what she's saying is across the state, then Ms. McClellan
Correct.
worked with
I
a group of
apologize.
lawyers. As I mentioned, many districts have adopted this policy.
President Schultz, we were talking about disproportionately discriminating against women. And this, I'm just throwing this question out because I see it all the time, is males wearing, they've got a t-shirt that have the sides cut out. You can see their chest. But a male chest isn't viewed as the same as a female chest. So would that be dress coded because private parts are showing?
It should be.
I mean, that's where I'm going. Is that how that would be viewed? Because you could see through their shirt, through the cutouts. Would that be viewed as showing private parts?
Yeah.
And that's kind of a...
Which I would think would be in the standards set forth by our district. It's in the policy that we have.
It's in the policy that we have right now currently.
But is that going to be viewed as private parts of a male
Yes,
than a
in
female? And that, I mean, again, these are, that may be interpreted differently from some people.
I mean, that's fair. Again,
And so it is very, I agree, it is very hard when we talk about dress, about disproportionately holding females and males to the same standard. And so that's difficult. And I could see on a high school campus that that's not something that would be viewed as a male's private parts being shown. And I could see that not being addressed. And again, in a concern, what's the
Should we
answer? I
say
don't know.
chest, back, stump, so we list the body parts? So instead of, being vague, we say chest.
Madam President, may I, again, I think I'm looking at your existing student dress standards within the Code of Conduct that's Higley's adopted, and it mirrors the language that you have currently. Clothing that immodestly exposes the chest, abdomen, midriff, genital area, or buttocks is not permitted. So you could keep that language within your existing policy, or I think, frankly, comparing the apples to the oranges of the new discussion, the only piece in the new proposed language that isn't covered is the midriff. If you wanted to adopt a recommended change to the policy that is before the board to include clothing must cover the entire midriff with material that covers the front, back, and sides, I do think that would get to Ms. Reese's point about the male chest. I don't think you have to put the word chest in there, or the word buttocks, or the word genital. I think, I think if you add that, that addresses at least some of the governing board members' concerns. It doesn't address all of the issues that you've raised that might evolve out of a dress code, but I do think that would address some of your concerns, and then you could see if that's amenable to the board or not. So my suggestion would be for you to add, to amend the motion to add the following language: "The clothing must cover the entire midriff with material that covers the front, back, and sides." And then to see if you want to move the policy forward or not.
Okay, so I don't remember all that you just said, but can I just say I'd like to make a motion for all that verbiage to go in there? Because I can't repeat all that.
What you would do is say that you move to amend the motion that's on the floor to add the language as proposed by council.
Yes. I can't remember all that. I still can't remember. Can you repeat everything she just said?
So I can say it more slowly. So clothing must cover the entire midriff with material that covers the front, back, and sides. Correct.
Are you making the motion, or who's making the motion? Okay.
I motion that we amend the policy to include must cover the entire midriff, front, back, and sides. I'm sorry, excuse me, must cover the entire midriff with material that covers the front, back, and sides.
Second.
Questions, comments, concerns?
My question to the board is, how do you expect, if we've had this policy in place since 2001, for it to be enforced? It never does. It never does because we live in Arizona and it is hot. And so when our football players do certain things and then they come back inside, it does not get enforced. I understand and I hear where we are coming from. I think it's important for us to be reflective of what is possible to be enforced. I have, from the top of my shoulders to my hip bone is 22 inches. It is a freak torso. Do you understand how frequently my midriff shows if I don't find shirts that are appropriate? And so I'm going to be punished from my genetic makeup. I find that to be difficult. Sides and back, at what point? Backs of my shoulders, because your tank tops would do the same thing. So again, I hear where our place is coming from, and I don't think it's a misguided place to be coming from. I don't. I just don't understand how this language corrects the problems that you even expressed currently exist. And like, I just don't understand. If all we do is go back to what was done before, how do we change anything? I just don't get it.
President Schultz, how do all these other schools enforce their dress code policy? How do charter schools enforce their strict dress code policy? How do the 100 schools that she looked up enforce their dress code policy? There's a policy, we enforce it, just like the hundreds, how many policies? We have over 300 policies in this district. And staff is put in charge of enforcing those policies. If we're making policies, I've said it before, if we're gonna make policies, we need to ensure that it's enforced. So, yeah, I mean, it's, once a policy's made, it will be communicated to the teachers and school staff, and then the staff will then communicate it to the students. And if those students come in, they've been notified, an email will go out to the parents, letting the parents know what the new dress code policy is, which this should have been done prior to school starting, but unfortunately it wasn't. But we have a way to communicate policy down to the students, to parents, to ensure that everybody is aware, and then the staff will be responsible for enforcing it. I mean, this isn't anything new. It applies to every policy that we have.
So, Ms. McClellan, can you just remind me how many districts across the state have adopted this policy, including our surrounding districts?
Madam President, there are 10 districts that have adopted this policy.
Thank you.
President Schultz, not that I want to spend more time on dress code. I still think that we're kind of a little bit of ways away. And for me personally, I would like to ask Ms. McClellan, I'd like to, we need to do something. We need, and I'm not saying, our current dress code, like Ms. Wade said, it's not enforced now. That's, besides the fact of why are we not enforcing a policy, that's a whole separate question. But in the other instance, why are we not enforcing it? Is it too difficult? Is it not appropriate? Is it, what are the issues there? And I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I'm just saying, because I know. But I think we're still a little bit of ways of where we should be, in my opinion. And I think Ms. McClellan, hearing some of this conversation, I would like the opportunity to still table this, ask Ms. McClellan to kind of go back based on some of our conversation, see what we can combine. I don't think we need to go as strict as we were. I think we do, I still think we need a little bit of leeway. And I know, again, it doesn't mean we're all going to be on the same page. At this point, I'm not comfortable, for me, I'm not comfortable approving the original one as it's presented, and I'm not necessarily comfortable approving the amendment. So I know at some point we have to make a decision.
We have a motion on the floor.
I get it, but we have to set a precedent. We have to know it's going to be able to be enforced. We have to know it's the right way for our district. Our current dress code is working and not working, and we've asked that dress code be addressed for some time, and so it's finally here. But I think we need to get it right, and I think we need to get it right, not just part of our board. I get a 3-2 vote can pass, but I'm not comfortable with either one. So I'm just saying I can tell where this vote's going to go, and I would end up not voting, and we'd be at a 2-2, and we're going to be where we're at. So that's just where I'm going. So instead of going there, I would like to see if maybe that's something that we can do, and maybe kind of come a little bit closer together.
Mrs. McClellan, is that something that you could take based on our conversations? As Ms. Reese said, we table it and we bring it back at the following meeting or possibly the meeting after that, depending on your schedule.
Of course.
Okay. I agree with Mrs. Reese. I'd like to make a motion to,
We have a motion on the floor. It was seconded. So
and we seconded it, but now we can make another motion to, another amendment.
Madam
'Cause we always
President,
have- so-
motion to tables.
Yes, so I'd like to make a motion to table the current item 7.1, policy JICA, for more information from our legal expert and a new policy read.
Seconded.
All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed?
Aye. Not for opposing, I am in favor, aye.
Okay.
Aye.
5-0. We will table this and look for more direction from Mrs. McClellan and hopefully come to a policy agreement that makes sense
So
for
do
our
we
district.
I'm sorry, so do we ignore the first motion that was seconded to make an amendment?
Yes. Okay, moving on to policy 7.2, I make a motion to approve policy GBEF, social media and cell phone use, second read.
Seconded.
Thank you, Mrs. Wade. Second it. Questions, comments, concerns for social media use, Mrs. Anderson?
I'm sorry. In the update, it was stated that volunteers was not added to this because we have volunteers signing a code of conduct. So you're just saying on this piece of paper you're agreeing to, it doesn't apply to a policy. You're just going to agree to it because you signed a piece of paper. So I just don't understand why we can't add it to
We won't get volunteers. If we could say we're going to control their social media, it would be very difficult
I
for
don't
us to
think-
get,
I hope they don't think that that's what it means, that we're controlling social media. We're just saying.
It'd be interpreted as that.
Responsible. Well, then we have, again, a problem with language. But is that
that we're
the
going to
reason, Ms.
monitor
McClellan?
social media for volunteers.
Ms. McClellan, is that what it was for the purpose for
Madam
not putting
President,
it in?
members of the Governing Board, Ms. Anderson, so the district doesn't have the ability to discipline volunteers or any control over them. The only thing that you can do is if a volunteer acts inappropriately, you can not allow them back on your campus, right? So if you find that a volunteer is communicating inappropriately with students, you certainly have the ability to control that by not permitting them or by tightening your volunteer process. But this particular policy is based upon the guidelines that were published by the State Board of Education pursuant to a state law that required them to publish those guidelines. And all of that is only applicable to school district employees.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted an understanding of why. Thank you.
Sure.
President Schultz, Ms. McLennan, what happens if a volunteer, obviously if they're volunteering in a classroom or anywhere in the school and they overhear information about personal information about a student and they share that information publicly? Is there anything in the code of ethics that would cover that, or how is that handled?
Madam President, Ms. Van Hook, so the only state law that applies to volunteers is ARS 15514, which says that you have to fingerprint and background check individuals who are on your campus who are volunteering, who are not immediate relative or the parent or legal guardian of a student. So that's the only statute in Title 15 that really applies to volunteers. If a volunteer on your campus or a visitor on your campus, they don't necessarily need to be a volunteer, they could be just somebody who's there visiting. If they act or violate your current policy that's in Section K, or if they are violate your school rules, then the remedy is to remove them from the campus and to create parameters by which they couldn't do that again. But a parent or a volunteer who's on your campus does not have the requirement to follow FERPA. Only school employees do.
And is that verbiage anywhere in policy as to such violation?
It's in your visitor policy, which is in Section K.
Okay, thank you.
President Schultz.
Mrs. Reese?
Ms. McClellan, just a quick question. How do we protect those students who don't have photo release from?
I'm sorry, Ms.
That don't have a photo release, that we don't have authorizations for their photo to be used? How do we protect that? We have foster kids, and if we have volunteers who can take pictures of students and post it on social media, how do we protect them?
Sure. Madam President, Ms. Reese, so again, that's more to the implementation than the policy creation. But if there are volunteers who are posting pictures inappropriately, what your staff should do who are supervising them is discuss it with them. We've sent warning letters home to parents or to staff members and explaining so that the remedy is really in the enforcement of your school rules.
Mrs. Reese, I know that when I volunteer, it's in the paperwork, and then also when we arrive that you can't take any pictures of other kids, even if they're your friends' kids, only your student, if you're a chaperone on a field trip, let's say, or a volunteer. So I know it's reiterated, at least when I volunteered.
Well, I know, and Ms. Richards is going to send us what the volunteer agreement looks like, so we have an idea of what that verbiage is. But I know that boosters post and, things like that. So that's why I was asking. I just want to make sure that those kids that need protection are protected.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns? All those in favor of?
Aye.
Aye. Of policy 7.2, policy GBF, social media and cell phone use. Yes?
Aye.
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 Okay. All those opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Moving on to future agenda items. Obviously, the next agenda item will be, or a future agenda item will be our dress code.
Well, Heidi, can you forward this, please?
I was just curious how, I read that we have a new visitor management system, Raptor. Just curious how that's going, how it's working out, and
Mr. Walker would love to elaborate on that.
Sure. Sorry, President Schultz, Vice President Anderson. I don't have any statistics prepared tonight, but we did launch the visitor management system at the first of the school year. It is up and running across all campuses. We are currently working to optimize it. There's a process in place to review how it's working. We're working with the vendor, the customer service representative, to learn how we can better support the sites. There has been some growing pains just initially launching any technology, but we're working through that with IT. We're working with our sites to be able to follow the process through the guidance from Raptor Technologies. But I'd say overwhelmingly, I've gotten very complimentary support of the process. Front office counters are glad that this is in place, and it's something that we're using across all campuses in the district office as well.
yeah, and if it can be, if you want to give us a more detailed update later, that was for other, next agenda or even our superintendent report that I didn't.
Sure, I'm happy to update it.
That was my.
Any specific information that you're seeking regarding?
Anything, just your kinks, the great things, responses, what it looks like. I do need to get out and volunteer, but
Sure.
just anything like that, so it helps to promote it, and we're in a public meeting, and just update us on that.
Absolutely.
Also, I asked a question in our questions, but I didn't have a response. Is it possible to do substitute teacher recognitions? Or is that something, I think I've asked this a lot, but is that something that we can make?
So, Vice President Anderson, members of the board, we have drafted responses to those questions that will be in status for you. Our substitutes are actually employees of ESI. And so it's not like when we had rescue subs and they were on each campus all the time. It changes really frequently. I do know our administrators thank them and honestly try to bribe them to come back to their campus. You know what I mean? That's not what you're asking, but they're not technically our employees. The other part of yours. Yeah.
When we recognize volunteers, you know what I mean? So I was just trying to give them a nice shout out because they continue the education process.
I think that our administrators would stand up and say they have certain people that come. Oh, you want me to call somebody out until they can? Somebody want to elaborate how you recognize substitutes?
No.
Is that what you're asking?
Not today at all.
Okay.
I just, if you feel like it wouldn't work well.
Mr. Potts looked at me like, okay, I got it.
Potts, if you want to recognize someone, please, but I was just trying to think of a way to celebrate them.
Yeah, they're very, very
hard.
important.
Yes.
I think
We can't make it without them. So, yeah, we could have people elaborate how they personally do that. But in terms of points of pride, I believe, we got a question too about, are we recognizing grounds, maintenance, warehouse? Yes. So I think every employee of ours is an employee, and they're all fantastic. So.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Potts, you're off the hook.
I want to.
There are some great ones out there for sure.
Yeah.
All right, anything else? Otherwise, I move that we adjourn this meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good night, thank you.